We're live.
We don't really have an intro or a theme song yet, do we?
No. I kind of was going to do like Meet the Columbus, Welcome to another episode of Meet Thyself.
Will people even listen if we don't have the jingle beforehand? Do people listen anyway? Today we're going to talk about grief. I know that this time of year, especially around the holidays, the solstice, Christmas time, a lot of people experience heavy emotions. They experience previous traumas that come to the surface. It's just a very, very hard time of year. When people say it's magical, doesn't mean all, illusions and fairies and fun. It can really hit us hard. Aaron, I know that you've had some of your own grief lately, and I've had plenty of experiences in my life, just like everybody has. It's part of being human. So today we thought we'd talk about grief, our experiences with it, and some potential ways to handle it. And I know that in finances we have to do this, but I don't know what it means for anything that we're sharing in terms of growth and psychology and trauma. But this is for educational purposes only. We are not licensed professionals. We can only share our experiences and what we've discovered works within us. Take that for what it is, and go forth and grow.
Most definitely.
So, Aaron, what did you want to talk about grief this week?
I want to talk about it because there's a end of a relationship, and I am feeling lots of grief. And December for me, even though it's January, December for me is a very hard month for me. I experience a lot of grief from losing other relationships, best friends passing that month. So many things that I feel like once you get through it, and once you actually identify what it is and you go through it and you don't just try to mask it, you can become a better person.
How?
So,
in what way? Explain that a little bit deeper.
Better person as in self-improvement, or even finding purpose, kind of what our subject line is.
So are you saying there's ways to find purpose through grief?
Yes.
How have you experienced that before? And just the experience,
And just the experience.
And just the experience. What does it look like? What have you felt like? Make it real.
Well, with my experience in finding, purpose or coming out a better person, I'll say like when I lost my best friend, and it took me 3 years, or no, it took me 2 years, a year of grief. And it took me a whole nother year to finally take it on. Went to go see, counselor, or not, is that what they call it? Counselor? Yeah. Therapist. And I talked to some people that were close to me. I talked to family members, and there was behaviors I had changed. Experiencing that grief, I had tried to mask it by like obsessive drinking, going out, hanging out with the wrong people. But whenever you lose a relationship, that doesn't mean that it's the end for you, for like that person.
It seems like what you said is that just because there is a death in a relationship doesn't mean that we die, but maybe we feel a piece of ourselves that we gave to that relationship
Mm-hmm.
dying
Right.
in essence. I think what the conclusion that I've drawn from listening to you speak is that we often experience grief, and maybe the prerequisite for grief is experiencing the death of a relationship.
Right.
So today, here's how I'd like to, go through this. I want us to each share our experiences and some of the past griefs that we've had. And I have an interesting experience with myself, and that's actually evolved and covered my entire life. And my unique experience is only that. It's just unique. It's not better or worse, but maybe I can open a different perspective on it. But then I want us to go over, what does grief mean to us? What are the causes of it? Can we simplify it? Can we objectify it? Can we make it known? Because oftentimes when we know and understand and have the knowledge of that which hurts or angers or fears us, we the sting of that unknown goes away, and then we can be open to it because we understand it. After that, I want to talk about how grief influences us, um, and about the connection, the physical connection between our hearts and our minds, and then some tools that we can go over. Part of the purpose of this whole thing is sharing what we have seen work in our own lives, so that others might get ideas of how it can work in their lives. Um, and yeah, we'll come up with our own conclusions after that. But are you cool with kind of approaching it that way?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. And before you go into that, could you, because I'm sure you got an interesting perspective on it. Can you just define grief?
No, we're going to go over our experiences first. That's the second part.
That's the second part.
Yeah, I want to get the stories out. I want it to make it approachable so that we can go back and use definitions. I don't want to start with a definition. I'm going to start with a feeling.
Right.
So, is there a story of grief that you would like to share? If not, I can go first.
You can go first. Yeah.
So I've had grandparents die, and I've had some of my most painful grief has been at the end of relationships, and it doesn't usually matter who ended the relationship. I've been ended with, and I've ended, and sometimes it can create the same amount of pain. Um, Maybe it's just how we approach it is different. But my real grief started before I think I had the mental ability to grieve. I was 3 years old, and I was living in Virginia at the time. And there were two best friends I had. There was Joey and Christopher. And Christopher and I were maybe 6 months behind Joey, which in 3 and 4 year olds is about 10 years. So he was the old kid. He was the one we looked up to. He was the one that we were always trying to impress, and he and I had this rivalry to vie for his friendship. But it was the type of thing where, when one of us got chicken pox, all of us got together. And so Joey was a shy kid, and when he was 3 and I was 2 years old, we went to a special needs, like preschool kind of thing. And the reason I went is because I was not talking yet at 2. I'd never uttered a word. And he was going there because, unbeknownst to me at the time, he had some health problems. You don't talk to a 2 and a 3-year-old about their health problems and things like that. So I didn't understand. But Joey would not go to school without me. And, I wouldn't go places without Joey and things like that. When Joey was 4, he ended up dying of leukemia. And he was my first friendship in the world. He was, the first experience I had as love of a best friend. But because I was 3 years old when he died, I didn't have much of a reaction. And I'm only starting to learn kind of what that was about now, 30 years later. And I realized that in the mind and the heart of a 3-year-old, I think things are a lot more open. Things are more detached. We haven't grown maybe the ability to form that heart attachment that is so meaningful and so deep, and these connections with somebody maybe other than in my case my mother and my father, kind of thing. And so the interesting thing about Joey's death was that I experienced that grief over a lifetime. I still some days think about what Joey would look like, if we would still even be friends, if we would talk. But the strange thing is, and my mom is partially responsible for giving this to me, is that I've never felt Joey leave. And whenever there's been, a guardian angel moment or something else, it's been Joey. And we've always had, a little, you could almost call it shrine, but we've had a statue with us the entire time that it's a little boy fishing. And Joey, uh, I remember him either in his blue baseball cap when he was bald because of chemo, or I remember him like a yellow raincoat. And um, he had a fishing pole. So just that shrine stayed with us our whole lives. But there's been many times when I haven't known why, but I've missed Joey. There was one time, a few years ago when I was awakened spiritually that he flooded my heart for a while. And so I had to go and I looked up his death certificate. I looked up, what happened. I talked to my mom about it for a while. And I, it's, it's a different perspective because it wasn't something that was ripped away from me because I didn't have the ability and the stickiness of that tether in my heart yet to feel it ripped. But as I grew, I slowly felt that draw. And so I still have grief to this day. Or when I think about Joey, it's melancholy, and there's sadness in it, but it's not debilitating. It makes me think and ask more questions about why I've had the feelings rather than trying to suppress them. So I've had a very unique experience with grief. My best friend died when I was 3 years old before I could really comprehend it like an adult would. But because I've always had that with me and I've always known about it and it's never left me, it's like, oh, wait, I had a friend named Joey once. No, like this, he was my first best friend, burned into my memory, my heart, my soul. I got to observe those stages of grief, and I think it's allowed me to have a better hold on grief as I've grown into an adult. I've shed tears. I've even shed tears for Joey, and it was not when I was 3. And I've shed tears for my grandfather, and my grandmother, and everyone, both grandfathers actually. And I've I've been lucky in that the trauma and the grief of deaths that I've seen in my life are now a natural part of it for me. They always have been. And so I've gotten some of my worst trauma from relationships. Death and that grief have never seemed to give me trauma because of that. Now, if my close family dies, if the love of my life dies and things like that, I cannot say I'm going to deal with it like I was able to with Joey, with my grandparents, with others in the past. Um, those are not things I can detach from, nor do I want to. Uh, However, the most painful things that I've had have been the end of relationships because it was grief I did not know how to deal with. So that's my story, long-winded, but this is actually the first time I've ever told it publicly. I know you probably didn't know about the story. It's not one I really share. It's It's very, very close to the heart. But if we're here to help and give people things that hopefully they can use too, it's time. What about you? Is there a story that you can share that affected you that you want to?
Yeah, I feel like for me, I have a small family. So people dying wasn't something regular to me. I've lost family members that wasn't too close to. One is you'll see at a family reunion. Um, Probably went, yeah, almost what 21, 22 years when I had my first experience with death and grief, and that was with my best friend. And I really don't want to get into the details of the story at all, but I mean, he died gun violence. I'll say gun violence. No matter who it's from, it's gun violence. Um, and even being there at that moment, and and how it was literally one of the toughest times of my life. Even after that, for years, and I didn't know how to deal with it. I had never lost anybody. To me, I had never lost. I've never lost anybody. My mom, parents, my grandparents were still alive. Um, Everything was just there, and that happened, and the way it happened, and the blame, the actual blame from family members, uh, of his family. It was a really, really tough time. Like, I can't think of a more powerful time than that. More, it is it's unfathomable. Like, really, it's I don't know how I came out at all. But my experience with that, I always feel like he's with me, and he shares the same birthday as my son. Well, my son shares the same birthday as him, and for some for some reason, he loved his birthday. He, like, if it was his birthday, he's going to tell you 200 times. He's telling everybody.
He's telling you days 364.
He's telling everybody.
T minus. Yeah.
Everybody, right? But everywhere, often, like probably 4 or 5 times a day. His birthday was March 27th, and I always see the numbers 327. Like, I've told people this. It's just everywhere. I'll get a receipt. I'll see the time. I'll see random numbers. It'll be something paused on 320. It just everything will be 327.
Every time, every day you look up the clock, it turns out to be 327.
Every
right?
time. Well, I don't look. Yeah,
No.
it just happened to look at the clock. Like, I'm not looking for it.
No, I know.
But it's just like and it reminds me every single time. Every single time.
Now, it reminds you every single time, and it sounds like, and I don't know if you want to go into this, but you had some fairly terrible reactions to this thing that happened, and it caused grief.
Hmm.
But grief that is unfelt and not dealt with in the moment turns into trauma. It's when we repress the emotions and the feelings that we have that it turns into trauma. And our trauma is usually the source of our negative reactions, our defensive reactions. So, do you feel comfortable sharing with some of the things that you did? You don't have to go into specifics if you want to, but how did your body and your life react with this trauma? Um,
Like kind of what happened after, like the
what happened afterward?
behaviors.
Yeah.
Oh yeah,
What
yeah.
was the result of your trauma?
The result was I was indirectly suicidal. I was living life on the edge. Like I would do some crazy shit, crazy, like crazy. And what in every situation, I compared it to what I experienced. I said nothing will make me ever feel as bad as this. So I was literally, well, not literally, but willing to jump off a cliff and without a parachute and be like, if I live, I live. If I don't, it's not as bad as what I went through. So, that paired with drinking and being around people really created some very, very bad behaviors. And I don't even, I couldn't even tell you what all I was doing. I was just living life really on the edge. Like, and that, yeah, I mean, people have seen it and they're like, yeah, that's Aaron. He's crazy. Like, what the hell is wrong with him? And that's what it took. I was out. I was at Cantina. They had this security guard named Lou. I had did something really stupid the night before, and I felt so bad about it. I came back to apologize to him, and he just said one thing to me. He said, "What's wrong with you?" And he didn't say it in a way like he didn't say it in a way of like, what's wrong with you? Like,
It wasn't
he
malicious.
no, he asked me like it went through my heart. And I went back the next day, and then everybody were out. I just went back to apologize with him, and didn't even go out that night. And I literally went to the car and like cried because that one question he just said, "What's wrong with you?" He was like, "If you need to go come to church with me, you can." He didn't see me for the stupid behavior that I did the night before, or the many nights that I had. He saw it as I was trying to how would I say, like, release or trying to get over or mask something or
Responding to the trauma.
responding. When he asked me that one question, that next week I signed up for therapy because it just kept with me, and I was like, what is wrong? There's something wrong with me that I'm not identifying. And he was very significant that night. That shit, the stuff happened with my friend, because he was one of the last people we talked to before we went out to where we were going, and he was making jokes and stuff. And I remember when he passed, I went to him. I was like, my friend, he passed and whatever, and we had a moment there. But I wasn't like that before. I was really on a good path, and then
You were a good kid.
yeah, and then I just wanted to, yeah, I just wanted to not be here, but I didn't want to do it myself. I just want to live life on the edge. So
It is a very poignant story, John. Thank you for sharing. Um, these things aren't easy, and obviously you've done a ton of work because you and I are extremely close. We share things. We talk almost every day, and if we don't talk for 2 weeks, it's like if we didn't talk for 2 years, you and I came back, it'd be just like this conversation.
all right.
Um, and I've a lot of these things never completely go away, and they change quite a bit of our identity because it's so powerful. Um, But the fact that you're able to talk about it and visit it and actually see means that you've done a lot of work. And probably as far as you're concerned, you would have had to, or you would be dead right now. So I mean, it's important stuff, and it's heavy, but lifting heavier things makes us stronger. If it doesn't crush us,
Right.
So I don't know if you're ready to, but I think that's a good time to transition into what the hell is grief? How do we define grief? And how do we define the trauma associated with it? And so I want to pose that question to you. I have some things written down because that's what I do. But I'm going to start out with a quote that a lot of people know, and I think this was the one wonderful thing to come out of the entire series of WandaVision. Sorry for anybody who's a fan. I just wasn't for me. But there was a beautiful quote when Vision says to Wanda, what is grief if not love persevering? So can you define grief to me in your own words?
No, to me, grief is a feeling. It's really hard for me to define because when it hits you, it's not like you're numb because you can feel it all over your body.
Where does it hit you?
In the heart.
Yes. And that's not one I'm leaving open for discussion. It hits you in the heart.
Yeah.
That's grief. That is, and that's why I use that quote. What is grief if not love persevering?
Mm-hmm.
Because it hits you in the heart. And a lot of us are under the impression that our mind and our brain up here controls the body.
Mm-hmm.
And that if we think hard enough and think positive enough, we can master that. But I read a very interesting book when I was in my early 20s called How We Decide. And How We Decide basically shows this wonderfully brilliant book put together showing that we do not make logical decisions ever. We just have enough logical options in our mind. We actually always make decisions with emotions. And if we lose the emotional part of our functioning brain, we can no longer make any decisions, including to say yes or no, or to even stand up from the couch. Everything that we do is emotionally driven. And where the emotional signals actually come from physically in our nervous system start right here.
Mm-hmm.
This isn't our only brain. Up here, it's one of many. It's just what we think of as the seat of consciousness, maybe. But we're not really sure. Our entire nervous system is really our brain, and the heart is no small part of that. And so the heart actually dictates how we think. If we're overjoyed and elated, the world of possibility opens up to us. If we're angry, if we're grief-stricken, our worldview becomes very myopic and our brain shrinks, and we can't do anything besides survive. And so grief is really the heart. And to me, grief is the perceived death of a relationship, because our hearts live and thrive and are built in either love or the lack of love.
Right.
And a corrupted love is the love of material things, but love for others, love for service, love for anything spiritual that you want to insert in there, those are what creates relationships. And so it's the death of a relationship that we feel, and it's the love flipping to the other side of the coin,
right,
and leaving all of that room open for pain. And what do we like to do with pain, Aaron?
Not feel it.
Not feel it. We run from it. We sweep it under the rug. And it's only when that happens, it's when we feel emotions and then decide not to
Mhm.
feel them, to close that connection, to kill that connection rather than kill that relationship,
Mhm.
boom, trauma.
And before you had said that, I was thinking, I was thinking of a definition. I have gathered some words,
Cool.
and I was going to say when love leaves and you don't want it to.
There it is. Because when do you want love to leave?
Never.
Like, yeah, the only thing that wants love to leave is if anger's already seated there.
Right.
Like it's the devil who fears love the most.
Right.
And so when you're angry, and I experience this all the time, like when I'm sad or angry, the last thing I want is, hey, things are going to be okay.
Right.
No, they're not. I want to feel that right now, not the happiness. Right. Like, and so like when we tell ourselves that our emotions that we're feeling are wrong, and especially as men, I know we have a harder time, whether through nature or nurture, expressing those, because for me, grief has turned, into violence before, not against people, but against myself, against a punching bag, against a wall. And that's really, 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 really scary. And so it's taken me 30 plus years to truly understand what parts of grief are. I'm still learning.
Yeah.
How do you think grief influences us? And let's separate the idea of grief, because grief is a feeling that of love lost, which is fine, natural, and we don't live the human experience without experiencing grief. But how do you think when grief permanently settles into trauma, it influences us?
I mean, and when it goes into trauma, I mean, it can either make or break you. Some people never come out of those situations. Some people become, they lose their mom, they lose anybody. They become lifelong alcoholics, gamblers, whatever negative beha- behavior. Some people even become, I don't know if I've seen it, but I'm sure there's people obsessively successful to a point where they just work themselves to the ground.
Monetarily, you're saying. Monetarily, yeah. Like as a distraction.
Right. Where they think, this is what has to need. This is, something. Not saying that's bad, but it's like, too much of anything is bad.
Well, it's not healing anything, it's distracting.
Right. So, it could, when you don't deal with it, and it's trauma, yeah, it could make or break you as a person. And if you don't,
well, let's also take a look at the making you as a person. When can it make you? If you have this trauma and you've experienced it for years, use your personal example. How has that trauma that you held on to from the unrealized grief made you? It obviously broke you in a way.
right.
So how did it now make you after that break?
It made me appreciate that the time that I did get to spend, the love, and it made me value love for others and myself more instead of viewing it on the dark side.
It became more precious.
Yes. So once I identify what was wrong and I stopped playing the blame game with myself, that was a big part of it. I looked at it in a and I would say like not a, yeah, I looked at it in a beautiful way.
How did you learn to stop blaming yourself? It sounds like that was the key.
Yeah, that's literally one of the things the therapist told me to do was, well, every session she would say mentally take that trauma, the memories, the negative, everything negative about it, and put it inside a cabinet and lock it. And she would say, we'll return to it the next time. She literally told me that, like
So
every time.
she, if I were to picture an animal this animal gnawing at you and gnawing at you and gnawing at
Mm-hmm.
you, you can't just throw the animal away. It's gonna come back. You have to put a leash on it,
Mm-hmm.
and only once you have a leash around it or it's in a cabinet, it's controllable, it's observable.
Right.
Then you can start to work with it, manage it, accept it, train it.
Right. And you start to break it down. You start breaking down, like, why do you feel like it's your fault? And then you start breaking down the situation. Then there's other questions. I feel like, to me, what the therapist did when I was in there, I kind of thought it was like, almost feel like that she helped me 100%. But I also thought that she didn't help me. She just asked me the right questions, and I helped myself.
You've hit a huge nail on the head there. That is exactly right. No one technically can help us besides ourselves, but we cannot help ourselves without the relationships and the conversations without ourselves. And when I say without, I don't mean removing us, I mean outside of our inside.
Right.
So that's a really cool point that you brought up. Yeah, you healed yourself. Yeah, you had a coach help you get through it. Look, Archie Bunker won the Heisman Trophy, but he had a damn good coach too.
Right.
But he did it. It's his Heisman.
Right. But yeah, those questions were like, I was like, wow, like, I never thought about it. And that's when I realized the power of questions.
Did I say Archie Bunker? I meant Archie Griffin. Archie Bunker was a TV show.
I knew what you meant.
Bro, this is why I don't use sports references.
I was thinking that. I was like,
wait,
was that wrong? But I knew you were talking about Archie Griffin. So I was thinking maybe I was wrong. I'm like, maybe there's a show Archie Griffin.
That was me.
Yeah, it's especially with my like I said, the second, trauma was my grandparents. But to me, it was very natural. I mean, they're in their 80s, but you don't want it to happen.
Yeah.
But they also they died 2 weeks apart. So it gave me.
That's beautiful, actually.
It is.
Because like when we were talking about the heart-mind connection, we've heard so many stories about people dying of heartbreak and grief. And if we look at how the heart controls the mind, or the mind controls the heart, that's why we follow our hearts when it comes to love and not our minds. We cannot help it. I've never been able to help it, even though, you can't stop love. And so my grandparents also died. They never missed an anniversary. My grandmother had Alzheimer's for 6, 7, 8 years, like that. 5 years really bad, and the whole family took care of her, things like that. My mom, her partner, my granddad, they were just her full-time love and support. And the dog was her real nurse. The dog is what kept her going for so long. The dog was her only friend. She had so much love for her dog, and it was the dog I grew up with, Winter. She had so much, and he held on for so long until both my grandparents passed. He was like 20, 18, 19 years old. Wow. It was ridiculous. Like, we got him when I was 4 years old in Virginia. He made it all the way to Ohio, back to Virginia, and through my college years. Wow. And I graduated college at 23.
You always remember that dog.
Yeah, that was not my dog. That was never my dog. That was always my grandma's dog, even before she met him. That dog was born from my grandmother. And my grandfather passed within 6 months from liver failure. My granddad was the type of man who would drink a half a beer once a month. He took care of himself. He was a little old man who loved his family and feared a lot of life, but it made him an excellent dentist, and it made him excellent with money. Great investor in real estate and everything. But his fear is what drove him. However, his love for my grandmother, I think, was so powerful that his liver basically caught fire and died within 6 months. They never missed an anniversary together. And I saw that as the most beautiful thing. They got to live piece together. And so I digress, but yeah, you were talking about there's beauty in death, and that grief didn't cause a trauma. Yeah, we've lost a relationship. There was no trauma involved.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. There was no trauma when I lost my grandparents. It was before it even could turn to trauma. You already realize the beauty in it, and you identify it, and you're like, wow, I was very lucky to be able to have that example. You know,
Yeah, I think the only reason we can probably approach it and see the beauty in that is because we've experienced a different kind of trauma on a different level that wasn't able to be prepared for. So the in the darkness and in the shadow, there is light, and that there is gift, and that's what the definition of mercy is. It's light within the shadow. Um, yeah,
me and everybody avoids grief, but that's I'll say me personally, this is like one of the reasons why I wouldn't want to. Well, I have a cat, but I don't like. I wouldn't want to. I wouldn't want to deal with the grief of owning one. And I don't know how often it happens with animals, but I just don't want to go through it because a lot of times in my relationships, like with anybody, with mom, sometimes I just think about like, wow, I love this person so much. If they're gone, man, it breaks. Sometimes I break my own heart thinking about people are gone.
I do too.
I'll be like, wow, like
Yeah,
I don't know what I would do. Just think about it. Like it's almost like I'm trying to prepare for some reason, but like trying to control some situation. Like wow, like this, not prepared, but like,
yeah.
but just I don't know.
Because you've been through it before, you can see how much love you have, and you can see the opposite side of that coin of how much it's going to hurt when that love has mysteriously disappeared. And I think I wouldn't call it a misconception, but maybe a way that we can revisit that is that the love hasn't disappeared. It's just that the love was a part of her life, and the growth and the sustaining of that love. But if we have the grief, just like Vision said, that's still love preserving. If we didn't have love, we wouldn't care. It wouldn't be a thing. It would be like, I know,
Was that
uh,
Vision?
yeah, Vision from WandaVision. Yeah, remember. All right, what is grief if not love preserving?
For Wanda.
Yeah, from Wanda. That's Vision said it.
I was thinking Marvel.
It's Marvel.
Oh, okay.
It's on
I don't know
Disney.
Wanda.
WandaVision was the first Marvel TV show.
Oh,
It's when she goes evil.
oh, okay,
Sorry,
okay.
spoilers.
Yeah. I thought it was in the movie where Vision was
No,
in.
no, no.
Okay.
This was in the TV show.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I I think the conclusion that we've seen here is that grief unvisited creates trauma,
Mhm.
but grief is the reflection of love, and it's caused by the perceived death of a relationship.
Mhm.
And it's often because we don't appreciate and respect the ghost that has been there, and that gift was given to us during that time. So much so that you're not going to get an animal because you're afraid of the grief that it's going to cause. But dude, you really want to miss out on all of that love for however long it is? I think that's the real sin, the robbing of yourself, closing yourself off to love because of the fear of the inevitable death of that relationship. What is life if not death? You cannot have life without death. Immortal is not life.
And to add to that conclusion, just to put it on a purpose perspective, even though like I say I found maybe more purpose for myself, but there's a lot of grief that people goes through where they create purpose as in foundations. There's people that die from cancer all the time where there's foundations, drunk driving accidents where they push and they create a purpose around that person's death, that that grief, and they
They
make
make
it
it meaningful.
such, yeah, they make it meaningful.
And so they can they've transmuted that strength of that grief into a strength for action.
Yep. You see it all the time. You see people all the time. Even like you could say like Trayvon Martin's mom. She's a speaker around the world about police brutality and rights of African Americans.
Was it Sandy Hook that the kids started putting together an organization about gun laws? One of the leaders like shaved her head, and I remember the moment of solidarity and silence that she had, the power and the focus and the sheer force of will which came out of these kids after that massacre was astounding. And it's terrible because we haven't seen much change or anything done.
Right.
But
I don't think it was Sandy.
I think
Sandy Hook was a kindergarten.
That was an elementary school.
Yeah, it was the one in Florida. Yeah. I don't. They happen.
There's been too many. There's been too many.
But I know what you're talking about. They most definitely created purpose, and I believe a lot of those people that experience, those students that experience that now they're like adults and everything. But I think they're still on that. They're fighting for it. I think some of them are even in politics.
I'll vote for that. I'll vote for the unsung hero.
Creating identity and purpose and grief. So I think that, I haven't done as something as like that, but I could see it around us.
Yeah. Well, I think that we're trying to do something of service through this.
Right.
It's really in my opinion, one of my first steps to trying to lead an unselfish life.
Right.
And align my nature with service.
Mm-hmm.
Those kids were thrown into it, and I wouldn't wish that on my worst enemy. I wouldn't wish that on anyone. No matter what they've done, no matter what vengeance I feel or anything, it's not the right way. That being said, why don't we go over let's lay out some of the tools that we can use for grief, and I want to emphasize that these tools might be a good start. They might give a little relief, but if you have issues with trauma and grief, find help. Find it. Find help. That's my first tool. Find help before it consumes you. What's a tool that you have?
A tool that I like the most was therapy.
Therapy?
Yeah.
That's what tools did they use in therapy that you found useful?
So my first few sessions, I had a special type of therapy, where they sent these. I don't know if I'm saying it right. Electromagnetic pulses.
Yes.
I was holding on to these two things, and one it would keep going left and right and left and right, and I feel like it was like a form of meditation. But they wanted you to really meditate on the experiences and the trauma, and don't run from it. Go at it.
Head on. Face your fear. Bring it on.
Right.
If you don't know what we're talking about, you should listen to the last episode. Do the hard thing, and it's hard. It's painful. It tears you in two.
Mm-hmm.
So run straight at it. I like that. That seems to be one of the tools for life.
And she also recommended, there was a book. It was like a workbook. I don't know the name of it, but it was a workbook that I did every day about how I feel. So writing is a very powerful thing when it comes to like writing it and also talking about it. Because after that situation happened, I didn't even talk about it. There was no talking among my friends. There was nothing. We everybody wanted to know what happened. I told some of the closest people with me. I couldn't talk about it. I couldn't. I didn't want to. I didn't want to revisit. I didn't want to relive. I just, yeah. So I think talking to somebody, which is also therapy, but if you need to talk to, I talked to my mom, after things started to come to light, start talking to her about it. And I just,
That's awesome. You actually described the next tool that I was going to focus on, and then I want to explain kind of how this weaves back into what we talked about last week and those base foundation things of getting back to yourself, because that's what we're doing here is we're finding getting back to our natural selves
mm,
with what could be the strength of the trauma we've experienced. But it's lean into relationships, the few or the many that you might have. That's what other humans are here for, and that's what we're here for,
mm,
is to lean into those relationships. If you've just felt the death of a relationship, what could be better than feeling the life of
mm,
another relationship and strengthening and growing
mm,
that life? And the Stutz toolkit, which we talked a little bit about last week, and I'm going to make sure to put links to the Stutz book and some of the info. It's a documentary on Netflix, and then as well as How We Decide, which is a great book on how all humans use emotion to make decisions. Um, there's three things you get back to every time, and I'll probably repeat this on half the episodes we're here because I have found this to work better in the last 2 or 3 months of my life than almost anything else, especially when I'm lost or confused or feel any way. One, exercise and nutrition.
mm,
Two, is relationships. How do you foster relationships?
mm.
You reach out. That's it. Number two, relationships, reach out. Say it with me. Relationships, reach out. Relationships, reach out. The third one is reflection. So, number one, exercise and nutrition. I don't need to explain that to anybody. You get it. Two, relationships,
Mm.
reach out. Three is reflection. How do you reflect? You already gave me the answer a minute ago.
Write it down.
Right now, you reflect by writing.
And when you find somebody to talk to, I found this from experience, and also people like it when I do it, but find a good listener. Because, you know, I, me personally, like how you said earlier, when people is just like, it's okay. And they're just like talking about,
They're giving canned responses.
yeah. I kind of just like, either I found when people are going through trauma, they just, I mean, they just want to talk about it, and they don't want to even a response. You don't even have to respond.
Right. Well,
They just,
yeah. How can you have a relationship if only one heart is open? Yeah,
right.
I mean, in bad cases, that leads to obsession and stalking. And, the good cases, it just leads the person to grow a little bit more and not need the
Mhm.
return of that, or to not be affected by it. But if the other's heart is not open to receiving or to giving, there it's one way, and that's not a real relationship. So, yeah, I digress. That's all I had. But listening,
Yeah.
finding somebody who can listen, leaning
Yeah.
into those relationships,
Right.
and writing.
Hmm.
So, I think if we're going to cover all the tools just succinctly, one, find help,
Hmm.
do it. No ifs, ands, or buts. Just find help. Two, lean into relationships,
Hmm.
and a caveat is no, actually three is talk to people who can listen. That's the caveat, is talk to people, caveat, who can listen. Not everybody, and it's not your right to expect everybody to listen. You have to find the ones who are willing to listen. That's their own journey, and maybe they can't. Maybe they're going through 10 times. Like, dude, if I had started talking to you about grief like 2 days after your friend passed, not right of me. It's no right of mine to expect you to be able to listen and hold that space for me. It's nuts.
And some people don't understand. I couldn't, for those 21 years before, I couldn't talk to you about that. You lost somebody. I don't know how that feels. Like when somebody died.
Yeah, you
I
see it in
just
the movies, but
I couldn't talk about it with anybody. It was a very uncomfortable subject for me. I just like, I'll give them generic responses. I'm sorry to hear that.
that's awful.
It's
That must
gonna be
that must
okay.
hurt. Yeah.
Once I felt it, I'm like, it's not okay. Like, what? I don't want to hear it's gonna be okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess eventually it will, but right now it's not okay. Like, I just didn't want to hear it.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Fourth one, the fourth rule here, or the fourth tool.
Mhm.
No rules, just tools. Fourth one is right. Reflect and write. So what do we got? One, get help. If it hurts pride, if it hurts anything else, it probably means it's the right thing to do. If it doesn't hurt anything, good. It's the right thing to do. Your number two, lean into relationships. 3,
Write it down.
no, that's 4.
Oh,
Talk to people.
Talk to somebody. Oh, I
Talk to
thought I was
somebody.
leaning in relationships. I was like, okay.
No, because you can lean into relationships. That's like, I'm talking about distraction, man. I'm talking about going and playing a board game with your friends. I'm talking about remembering that we have
okay.
love. I'm talking about like going on a walk with your dog.
Gotcha.
Like lean into your relationships. Be with people.
Gotcha.
Nothing to do with the grief or anything else. Just be.
I kind of tied those in.
Of course, yeah.
I was
And,
like,
yeah.
they're listening.
I'm glad you made me clarify that. So 1, get help. 2, lean into relationships. 3, let's talk to people who can listen. You heard before.
Write it down.
Right. Just keep writing. Reflect and write.
Reflect.
One more time, because third time, fourth time, fifth time is always a charm. Get help.
Mm-hmm.
Lean into relationships.
Somebody that listens and reflect.
And write
So write it down. Write it down. Reflect.
Well, I don't think we have an outro song or music yet, but I want to leave people there. Thank you, Aaron. And we have some guests lined up for the next episodes we're doing. We're going to consistently try to keep Facebook Live going on a regular schedule, but that's going to get messed up a lot depending on people's schedules. I think we're going to try to release one of these a week and start to expand our different social medias like YouTube, things like that.
Oh.
So the reason I'm saying it is so we hold ourselves to it.
Mm.
But we'll see y'all next time with hopefully some more tools, some more experiences, and some more connection. Join us.
We'll see you next week.
See you next week.